A young billionaire enters a church in tears to save his ill daughter. A beggar girl says, "I know how to save her." What happens next is surprising. Ethan Blackwell's wristwatch showed exactly 3:47 p.m. when Dr. Peterson walked into the consultation room wearing that expression doctors train themselves to use for delivering bad news. Ethan knew that look well. At 43 years old, he had already seen it on the faces of executives about to declare bankruptcy, attorneys admitting defeat, employees confessing costly errors, but it had never hurt as much as it did now. "Mr. Blackwell, we've done every possible test." The doctor adjusted his glasses and took a deep breath. "Lily's tumor is resistant to treatment. It's spreading faster than we can control." Ethan set his jaw, the way he did in difficult negotiations. "How long?" The doctor hesitated. "Weeks, maybe a month." Ethan did not blink. His mind was already functioning like the efficient problem-solving machine that had turned him into a billionaire before age 40. "I want a list of the best experimental clinics in the world. I don't care about official approvals or risks. I want every option." "Mr. Blackwell, I understand your frustration, but we've already consulted the top specialists. Lily's type of cancer is extremely rare and aggressive. At this stage, clear your schedule for today," Ethan interrupted, standing up. "I want you and your team to review the case again. Tomorrow, I want a new treatment plan." "Mr. Blackwell, money is no object." Ethan pulled a checkbook from the inside pocket of his custom-tailored suit. "Name your price." Dr. Peterson looked at the floor, uncomfortable. "It's not about the money." Those words hit Ethan like a punch in the gut. In his reality, everything had a price. Problems were merely situations that needed the right investment to be solved. "It's always about the money, doctor." In room 507 of the hospital, Lily Blackwell was drawing smiling suns with a yellow crayon. At 5 years old, she was the perfect image of her mother. Golden hair, big blue eyes, and the same smile that had captivated Ethan when he first met Catherine 15 years ago. "Daddy!" Lily exclaimed when he entered, her eyes shining with joy despite her pale face. Ethan smiled, ignoring the heavy presence of the machines monitoring his daughter's vital signs. He focused on the moment, storing every detail in his memory. The purple unicorn pajamas, the colorful drawings scattered on the bed, the faint scent of strawberry shampoo in her thinning hair. "How's my princess today?" "Look what I made, Daddy." She showed him the drawing full of bright yellow suns. "They're happy suns, so the day will be nice." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed and carefully hugged his daughter, afraid of hurting her frail body. Against his chest, she felt so small, so vulnerable. "It's beautiful, Lily. Can I take it to the office?" "Yes, I also made one for Grandpa." Ethan swallowed hard. His father had passed away 2 years ago, but Lily always included her grandfather in her plans. "I'm sure he'll love it." The room door opened, and Catherine entered, carrying a small teddy bear. Seeing Ethan, she paused for a moment, obvious surprise on her face. "I thought you'd be in Tokyo for the investors' meeting. I cancelled." Catherine raised her eyebrows. In 15 years of relationship and 3 years of divorce, she had never seen Ethan cancel a business meeting. "Lily, sweetheart, I brought Mr. Hugs." She handed the bear to her daughter. "Why don't you tell him how your day went while I talk to your dad?" In the hallway, out of Lily's earshot, Catherine gripped Ethan's arm firmly. "What did Dr. Peterson say?" Ethan looked at the people passing by, nurses hurrying along, doctors consulting charts, visitors carrying flowers and balloons. No one seemed to notice his world was falling apart. "It's not good." "Weeks, maybe a month." Catherine covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a sob. "That can't be. You have to do something, Ethan." It was the first time in years she had spoken to him as though they were still a team, as if he were still the man she trusted to solve any problem. "I'm working on it." His voice came out harsher than he intended. "I'll find someone, some treatment. I don't care how much it costs or where it is." Catherine shook her head, tears now running freely. "That's not how it works, Ethan. Not everything can be bought." 12 hours later, Ethan parked his Aston Martin in front of the main office of Blackwell Enterprises. The clock on the dashboard read 4:12 a.m. The building was dark and silent, except for the 30th floor, his office, where the lights were still on, just as he had ordered. He passed security with a distant nod and went straight up to his penthouse suite. On his desk, piles of documents awaited, medical reports translated from various languages, unpublished experimental research, profiles of leading pediatric oncology specialists. His personal assistant, Sarah, who had worked for him for a decade, was asleep on the leather couch in the corner of the room. Hearing the door, she woke with a start. "Mr. Blackwell, I didn't expect you back so early. Any news from the clinics in Switzerland or Japan?" Sarah adjusted her glasses and checked her tablet. "The Zurich clinic stands by its previous position. They don't believe their experimental protocol is suitable for Lily's case." She hesitated before continuing. "The specialist from Tokyo sent a detailed response. I translated and put it on your desk." Ethan grabbed the document and skimmed through it. The conclusion was the same. There was no available treatment that could save his daughter. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Blackwell, the man who had built a financial empire from scratch, who negotiated with presidents and prime ministers, felt completely powerless. "Go home, Sarah. Come back after lunch. But I still need to organize the contacts with the German clinic and..." "Go home." His tone left no room for discussion. When he was alone, Ethan collapsed into his Italian leather chair and gazed out the panoramic window. The city was starting to awaken, lights switching on in the buildings, the first people rushing through the streets. A world that kept spinning, indifferent to the fact that his daughter was dying. He picked up the photo of Lily from his desk, a snapshot from last Christmas, before the diagnosis, when she still had rosy cheeks and thick hair. Her smile lit up her face as she opened a present. That was when something unusual happened. A tear escaped Ethan's eye and fell onto the glass of the frame. He hadn't cried since. He couldn't remember. Perhaps at his father's funeral 2 years before, though he had tried to maintain his composure even then. He quickly wiped his face, ashamed of his weakness, even when alone. Feelings were inefficient. Problems needed solutions, not emotions. But this time, there was no solution. For the sun was already high when Ethan left the office. With no clear destination, he drove through the city's streets, passing by parks where children played, schools where students were leaving with colorful backpacks, restaurants where families ate lunch together. Without realizing it, he found himself parked in front of St. Mary's Cathedral, an imposing Gothic structure in the city's historic district. Ethan hadn't entered a church since his wedding to Catherine, and even then, it had only been a formality. His father, a deeply religious man despite financial struggles, used to say that faith could move mountains. Ethan had learned from personal experience that bank accounts moved mountains far more efficiently. Even so, without a second thought, he parked the car and stepped into the nearly empty temple at that hour. An elderly lady prayed in one of the front pews, and a priest was organizing books at the altar. Ethan took a seat in the very last pew, feeling out of place in that environment. The silence unsettled him. He was used to noisy meeting rooms, constant notifications on his phone, the hum of the helicopter he often used to avoid traffic. "May I help you?" The voice startled him. A middle-aged man in clerical attire had approached without Ethan noticing. "No," Ethan replied curtly. "I just needed a place to think." The priest nodded, as though that made perfect sense. "Sometimes, silence is what we need to hear the answers." "There is no answer for my problem." The priest sat in the pew in front of him, turning around to face him. "Perhaps you're asking the wrong question." Ethan felt a growing irritation. He detested spiritual cliches, especially now. "My daughter is dying and no doctor can save her. What would be the right question?" Instead of offering a ready response, the priest remained silent for a long moment. "I'm sorry about your daughter," he finally said, his voice gentle. "The question isn't how to save her, but how to be with her at this moment. How to make each day count." The words struck Ethan like a slap. Part of him wanted to dismiss the man, to say he didn't need advice from someone who clearly didn't understand his situation. Another part, however, recognized a painful truth in the priest's words. The priest stood, placing a hand briefly on Ethan's shoulder. "I'll be in the sacristy if you need to talk." When he was alone again, Ethan let the tears come, no longer trying to hold them back. He wept silently for the daughter he loved more than anything. For the time lost in the years he spent more focused on building his empire than being present. For the moments he might never share with Lily. "You're sad too." The child's voice caught him by surprise. A girl, about 8 years old, stood in the aisle between the pews, watching him with curious eyes. She wore a simple, faded dress, and her dark hair was tied in uneven braids. Ethan wiped his face quickly, embarrassed at being caught in a moment of weakness. "Shouldn't you be in school?" he asked, trying to regain his composure. The girl shrugged. "I learn more here," she pointed toward the altar, "and Father Michael lets me help with the flowers." Ethan noticed that the girl did not appear intimidated by him. Unusual. Most people felt the weight of his presence, his natural authority. This child, however, looked straight at him, unreserved. "Do you come here often?" the girl asked, stepping a bit closer. "No." "Then you came because you have a really big problem." It wasn't a question. Ethan felt a strange chill run down his spine. "How do you know?" "People only seek help when they really need it," she smiled, as if sharing a secret. "It's about someone you love, isn't it?" Ethan swallowed. It was unsettling to hear such insight from a child. "My daughter is sick." The girl nodded solemnly, as though she understood the situation perfectly. "What's her name?" "Lily." "Pretty name." The girl moved closer, now only a few steps away. "I know how to help your daughter." Ethan felt a mixture of irritation and pity. The last thing he needed was a child making up stories to comfort him. "Thanks, but I've already consulted the best doctors in the world." "Doctors won't cure Lily." The girl shook her head, as if he'd missed the main point. Ethan pulled out his wallet, taking out a few bills. Poor children often invented stories to get money. He couldn't blame her for trying. "Here, buy yourself something." He held out the money. "Now, if you'll excuse me." The girl did not take the cash. Instead, she looked at the bills as though they were something curious, almost amusing. "I don't want your money, Mr. Blackwell." Ethan froze. He hadn't said his last name. "How do you know who I am?" "My name is Ava." She ignored the question. "And I know how to save Lily, but you have to believe." Ethan put the money away, increasingly intrigued. "Believe in what, exactly?" "That there are things money can't buy." She smiled again, a smile far too wise for her age. "Things you can't see but that are real." Part of Ethan wanted to get up and leave. He was wasting time with a fanciful child when he should be searching for alternative treatments, contacting other specialists, doing something concrete. But another part, a part he rarely allowed to speak, was desperate enough to grab any thread of hope. "How could you help Lily?" Ava looked at the church door, then back at him. "I can show you, but I can't explain it in words. You have to come with me." "Go with you? Where?" "To meet someone who can help." The absurdity of the situation finally outweighed Ethan's curiosity. He was actually considering following an unknown child to some undisclosed location based on vague promises. "Listen, Ava, I appreciate your concern, but I have to go now." He stood up, adjusting his $3,000 suit, ready to end this strange conversation. But looking at the girl's face, he saw a certainty in her eyes that made him hesitate. "Lily has a stuffed animal, a blue bunny called Pingo," Ava said softly. "She won't sleep without it." Ethan felt his blood run cold. That detail wasn't in any news story, any social media post. It was something intimate, known only to close family. "How did you—" "I can help, Mr. Blackwell." Ava held out her small hand toward him. "But you have to trust. You have to believe Carnes at least a little." Ethan Blackwell, the man who never made decisions based on emotion, who analyzed every business move with icy rationality, found himself facing an impossible choice. Follow this strange child on an irrational hunch, or return to the hospital and helplessly watch his daughter fade away. Against everything his logical mind screamed, Ethan took Ava's hand in his. "Show me." Ethan's Aston Martin looked completely out of place on those narrow streets. As they headed to the outskirts of the city, the towering buildings and well-kept avenues gave way to modest homes, some with peeling paint and broken windows. In the passenger seat, Ava looked out the window naturally, as if riding in a luxury car every day. "Turn right at the next corner," she said, pointing to an even narrower street. Ethan obeyed, feeling more and more uneasy. None of this made sense. Why was he following a child's directions? With each block, the feeling that he was making a mistake grew. He thought of Catherine. What would she say if she found out he had abandoned the search for medical treatments to follow the whims of a street girl? "Are you sure you know where we're going?" he asked, noticing a group of teenagers on the sidewalk who stopped to admire the car. "Of course," Ava answered with surprising confidence. "It's right up ahead." They drove into an even poorer area. The houses were now tiny structures crammed together, some made of makeshift materials. Ethan had never been to this neighborhood, even though his company owned plots of land around here, areas his advisors had identified as potentially profitable for future developments. "Stop here," Ava said, pointing to a house at the end of the street. Among all the neglected residences in the neighborhood, it looked the oldest. It was a simple wooden structure, faded and worn, with a small front yard where, surprisingly, colorful flowers grew in contrast to the surrounding decay. A low, crooked fence defined the property, and the front gate hung precariously by a single hinge. "Who lives here?" Ethan asked, unable to hide the apprehension in his voice. "Grandma Elena," Ava answered, already opening the car door. "She's expecting us." "How can she be expecting us?" "Drew didn't tell anyone we were coming." Ava smiled, a grin that seemed to hold a secret. "She always knows." Ethan turned off the engine, looking around, worried for the car's safety. His business instinct was already calculating the property value, the cost of a possible neighborhood revitalization, the potential profit of a real estate development that could transform this forgotten corner. "Your car will be fine," said Ava, as if reading his thoughts. "No one will touch it." Reluctantly, Ethan stepped out of the vehicle. The contrast between his custom-tailored Italian suit and the surroundings could not have been greater. He felt exposed, out of place, a sensation he was unaccustomed to. He followed Ava through the small garden, noticing that the flowers, up close, were species seemingly unsuited to this climate or season. Red roses, sunflowers, lavender, and other plants he couldn't identify grew together in improbable harmony. The door of the house opened before they reached the porch. An elderly woman stood there, leaning on a carved wooden cane. Her deeply wrinkled brown skin, her white hair tied into a simple bun, and her faded blue cotton dress made her appear quite old. But her eyes were striking, dark, intense, and somehow younger than her aged face. "You took your time, Ava," the old lady said, her voice surprisingly strong. "Sorry, Grandma, Mr. Blackwell needed a moment to decide to come." The older woman looked directly at Ethan, studying him with a disconcerting intensity. "Ethan Blackwell," she said, his name sounding like a statement, not a question. "Come in, we don't have much time." The interior of the house was as modest as the exterior suggested, but impeccably clean and organized. The main room contained few pieces of furniture, a worn couch covered by a colorful throw, 2 old armchairs, a small wooden table with 3 simple chairs, and a shelf filled with old books and objects that seemed like mementos of a long life. What most impressed Ethan, however, were the plants. Pots of every size occupied the windowsills, the corners of the room, and even the center of the table. The aroma of flowers mixed with the smell of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling in small bundles tied with string. "Sit," the old woman said, indicating one of the armchairs. "We need to talk before you both leave." "Leave?" Ethan questioned, settling uncomfortably into the indicated seat. "For the creek," Eleanor replied, as though it were obvious. "That's why you came, isn't it? To save your daughter." Ethan felt a chill race down his spine. How did this woman know about Lily? "My name is Elena," the old lady introduced herself, sitting down in the opposite armchair with the help of her cane. "Ava told me about your daughter." "How could she know about Lily?" Ethan asked, still unable to understand how the girl possessed such specific information about his family. Elena smiled, the same mysterious smile as Ava. "Ava sees things other people can't. She always has, from a very young age. With all due respect, ma'am, I don't believe in fortune tellers or clairvoyance." "Nor would I ask you to," Elena replied calmly. "Believing without seeing is a gift few possess these days." Elena stood, leaning on her cane, and walked to a small dresser. She opened a drawer and took out a blue glass vial, no bigger than the palm of her hand. "The creek is in the mountains to the north," she said, returning to her armchair. "Ava knows the way. It's not a long journey, but it will be difficult for you." "Difficult? Why? I'm in good physical shape." Elena shook her head as though Ethan had completely missed the point. "It's not the physical path that will challenge you." She held the empty vial out to him. "This is for the creek water, but for it to work, you must understand something fundamental. Money will not save your daughter." "Then what will?" Ethan asked, holding the small vial. "You must give something you've never given before." Ethan frowned. "Money?" Eleanor shook her head, her face nearly pitying. "Something that can't be bought or sold, something truly yours." "Sorry, but that sounds like superstition," Eleanor finished, her eyes fixed on his. "A fairy tale? Maybe it is. Or maybe it's something older and more real than modern science." Ethan looked at the vial in his hand, then at Ava, who stood quietly against the wall, observing the conversation. None of this made any sense, and yet here he was in a stranger's house, holding an empty vial and considering a journey to a supposedly magical creek. "Why should I believe you?" he finally asked. "You shouldn't," Eleanor replied simply. "You should believe in yourself, in how far you're willing to go for your daughter." Ava came forward, stopping beside her grandmother. "The creek is real, Mr. Blackwell. The water has power, but only for those who have a pure heart." "And you think my heart isn't pure?" Ethan asked, sounding defensive. "Your heart is full of other things," Ava replied with disconcerting wisdom. "You need to empty yourself before you can receive." Eleanor gently touched Ava's arm. "You both need to leave now if you want to arrive before nightfall. Take him by the old path, Ava." The girl nodded, then looked at Ethan. "We have to go on foot from here. Leave your car parked out front. No one will touch it." Ethan put the vial in the inside pocket of his suit, feeling ridiculous. He still hadn't decided whether he believed this absurd story, but something prevented him from simply standing up and walking away. "What should I expect from this creek?" he asked Elena. "Expect nothing," the old woman replied. "Just be present. Completely present, perhaps for the first time in your life." Ethan stood, habitually straightening his expensive suit. "Should I come back here afterward?" "If you succeed, you'll know where to go," Elena answered enigmatically. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she took his hand in hers. Her hands were calloused and warm, with the texture of someone who had worked her entire life. "When you get there, Ethan Blackwell, remember, the price is not paid in money, it's paid in tears." Before he could ask what that cryptic phrase meant, Ava was already at the door signaling for him to follow. "Come on, Mr. Blackwell. We have a long road ahead." They left Elena's house, and instead of returning to the car, Ava led Ethan down a narrow alley behind the property. The path took them to an even poorer part of the city, with unfinished buildings and abandoned lots. Soon the last of the houses fell behind them, and they were walking a dirt trail winding between tall shrubs. "Shouldn't we drive to the mountains?" Ethan asked, already feeling the discomfort of walking in expensive dress shoes on uneven ground. "We can't get there by car," Ava replied without turning around. "For you can only reach the creek on foot by the old path. And how long will it take?" "It depends." "Depends on what?" "On you." Ava finally stopped and faced him. "On how many things you need to leave behind on the way." Ethan felt a rising irritation. He hated vague, cryptic answers. "Look, Ava, I appreciate your help, but I need concrete information. My daughter is dying in the hospital. I can't spend the entire day on a treasure hunt." Ava seemed unaffected by his irritated tone. "Would you rather be somewhere else right now? Doing what? Signing contracts? Firing people?" She shrugged and kept walking. "None of that is going to save Lily." "How do you know so much about my life?" Ethan demanded, following her. "About my company. About Lily." "I see things," Ava answered simply. "I always have. Grandma Elena says it's a gift, but sometimes it feels more like a burden." The trail began to climb, heading toward the gentle slope that would eventually become the mountains surrounding the city. Ethan looked back and saw the city stretched out below them, the downtown skyscrapers, well-kept residential areas, and the poor outskirts they had left. From this height, All divisions seemed arbitrary, artificial lines separating lives and destinies. His own corporate building, a tower of glass and steel he had personally commissioned from a famous architect, looked small and insignificant from here. "You're thinking about your company," Ava commented, still not looking back. "How did you—" "Your face changes when you think about business. It gets harder. Joe, pull the corner of your mouth like you do when you're evaluating something." Ethan stopped in his tracks, genuinely disturbed. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" Ava also stopped, turning to him, her dark eyes far too serious for a child. "Because helping people is the right thing to do. And because you need it more than you realize. I need a cure for my daughter." "Yes," Ava nodded, "but you also need healing for yourself." Before Ethan could respond, she pointed toward the horizon. "See those taller mountains? The creek is in the valley between them. We need to get there before sunset." They kept walking, the trail now steeper. Ethan had removed his jacket and loosened his tie, feeling sweat trickling down his back beneath his silk shirt. He was not used to hikes, especially not with improper footwear and under the afternoon sun. "Why didn't you visit your father before he died?" Ava asked suddenly, her tone as casual as if asking about the weather. The question hit Ethan like a blow. His father had died 2 years earlier, after a long hospital stay with lung cancer. Ethan, busy with the merger of 2 major companies, had put off visiting until it was too late. "How do you know that?" His voice came out hoarse. "You think about him when you look at Lily," Ava replied. "You feel guilty. You promised it would be different with her, but you ended up repeating the same pattern." "You know nothing about my relationship with my father," Ethan responded defensively. "I know he asked to see you in the hospital 3 times, and you were always too busy." Ethan stopped walking, feeling a surge of anger. Is this some kind of psychological game? Did someone tell you these things to manipulate me? Ava looked at him with an expression combining compassion and what appeared to be disappointment. "No one told me. It's what I see when I look at you," she continued walking. "You've used money your whole life to solve problems and avoid painful feelings. It works most of the time. But not this time. Not with Lily." Ethan stood still, watching the small figure of Ava move farther along the trail. Part of him wanted to turn back, return to the city, to his world of numbers, contracts, and certainties. But the image of Lily, frail in her hospital bed, kept him from giving up. With a frustrated sigh, he followed the girl. Ashtiufi and Bunja afternoon wore on as they climbed higher and higher. The path now ran through a dense forest, providing welcome shade after hours in the sun. Ethan was exhausted, his feet blistered, his shirt soaked in sweat. "We need to rest," he said, leaning against a tree. Ava stopped, studying him. "All right, but we don't have much time before sunset." They sat beneath a large tree. Ethan sank to the ground, unconcerned about dirtying his expensive trousers. Ava pulled a small water bottle from a pocket Ethan hadn't noticed and offered it to him. "Take a drink. Not too much. We need to ration it." Ethan accepted the bottle, sipping modestly before handing it back. "Do you make this trip often?" "When needed," Ava replied, taking a small sip herself. "And this creek, does it always work?" Ava hesitated. "It depends on the person. What did your grandmother mean by giving something you've never given before?" The girl stowed the bottle and looked up at the patches of sky visible through the leaves. "Each person has something different to give." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I can give." Ava looked directly at him. "Because the answer is in you, not in me." Sitting there in the quiet forest, far from ringing phones, from meetings, from endless reports and spreadsheets, Ethan felt something strange, a kind of internal stillness he hadn't experienced since he couldn't remember. Maybe since childhood, when he used to go fishing with his father at a small lake near their home. His father, a simple man who never understood his son's fierce ambition, who always said there were more important things than money. "Your father was right, you know," Ava commented again, as though reading his thoughts. "About what really matters in life." Ethan wasn't surprised this time. He was starting to accept there was something unexplainable about this girl. "He died thinking I was a failure as a son," he murmured, surprised at revealing something so personal to a stranger. Not as a businessman, of course. He was proud of that part. But as a son, as a person, he didn't think you were a failure, Ava corrected gently. He thought you were unhappy, and that made him sad. Ethan swallowed, a lump forming in his throat. How can you possibly know what my father thought? The same way I know about Lily's blue bunny, the same way I know about the offer from Thompson Corp that you turned down 3 years ago, the same way I know you have a secret safe in your office where you keep your very first dollar earned. Ethan felt a chill down his spine. Nobody knew about that safe embedded in the wall behind a painting, not even his trusted assistant. "Who are you, Ava?" he asked, voice nearly a whisper. The girl smiled, a smile that seemed to contain the wisdom of centuries. "Just someone trying to help." She reached out a small but surprisingly strong hand, helping him stand. "Let's go. The creek is waiting." Ethan took her hand and rose. As they resumed the hike, he felt something shift inside him. The certainties that had guided his life, everything had a price. Problems were just obstacles to be solved with enough resources, were starting to seem less solid. The sun began its descent as they walked along the crest of a hillside, offering panoramic views of the forest below and the mountains ahead. "Are we close?" Ethan asked, feeling his legs grow heavier after hours of walking. "We'll reach the valley before nightfall," Ava replied. "But finding the creek, that's up to you." "What do you mean? Don't you know where it is?" "I know exactly where it is, but not everyone can see it," Ethan sighed, tired of riddles. "Ava, I appreciate your help, but I need clarity. Your daughter needs more than just water in a vial," Ava interrupted, her voice unexpectedly firm. "She needs a father who understands what truly matters, who knows there are some things that can't be bought or controlled." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "You've spent your entire life avoiding what you fear most, Mr. Blackwell. Vulnerability, powerlessness, the knowledge that, in the end, we're all at the mercy of forces greater than ourselves." The accuracy of her words struck Ethan deeply. It was true. Every achievement, every acquisition, every dollar earned had been, in part, an attempt to keep that fundamental truth at bay, that there were things beyond his control. "How does that help Lily?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "To find the creek, you have to be willing to let go of control, to trust in something bigger than yourself." Ava resumed walking. "It's time to begin your real journey, Ethan Blackwell." The sun was setting when they finally reached the top of a ridge. Ahead of them, a narrow valley stretched between two imposing mountains, just as Ava had described. The final rays of sunlight illuminated the ground below, creating long shadows and bathing everything in a soft golden hue. "We're almost there," Ava announced, pointing to the valley. "The creek is down there." Ethan looked where she pointed, but saw only trees, rocks, and the growing twilight. "I don't see a creek." "Not yet," Ava agreed, a slight smile on her lips. "But you will if you're ready." They began their descent into the valley, the sky now a blend of deep blue and orange. Ethan felt every muscle ache after the long hike, but something within him, a determination he hadn't felt in years, drove him onward. For Lily, he thought, for his daughter, he would do anything, even believe in the impossible. The moon was already lighting the valley when they arrived at the bottom, an open space among ancient trees and mossy rocks. Ethan was exhausted. His expensive dress shoes, now ruined, had given him painful blisters. His silk shirt was stained with sweat and dirt. At that moment, the powerful CEO was nothing more than a tired, desperate man. "We're here," Ava announced, her small figure framed by the moonlight filtering through the trees. Ethan looked around, confused. He saw no creek, only a small clearing in the woods, where vegetation looked surprisingly lush and green despite the dim light. "I don't see any water," he said, trying to hide the frustration in his voice. Ava didn't reply. She walked to the center of the clearing and knelt on the grass. Gesturing, she indicated that Ethan should do the same. "What are you doing?" he asked, remaining standing. "The creek is here," Ava said simply. "You just have to be ready to see it." Ethan sighed. He was fed up with mysteries and riddles. He needed real results, a concrete solution to save his daughter. "Listen, Ava, we've come all this way and I appreciate your help, but if there's no creek, we should head back." Lily needs me. That's exactly why we're here, Ava reminded him, still on her knees. You need to trust the process, Mr. Blackwell. What process? We're in the middle of a forest, looking for a creek that apparently only you can see. Ava looked at him with a surprisingly adult expression, a mix of patience and compassion. What do you see when you look at this place? Ethan studied the clearing. In the faint moonlight, it just looked like open ground between the trees, covered in low vegetation. I see an empty clearing. Look again, Ava insisted gently. But this time, don't try to control what you see, just observe. Something in her voice compelled him to try. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at the center of the clearing. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he caught a subtle glimmer, something more than just moonlight reflecting. He moved closer slowly. The sound reached him before the sight. A soft murmur, almost imperceptible, like a distant whisper. Flowing water. You're starting to see, Ava said with a smile. Ethan blinked, and there it was, a small stream meandering through the clearing, its water so clear it reflected the moonlight like a liquid mirror. Strangely, he was certain it hadn't been there seconds before. How? He couldn't finish the question. The creek has always been here, Ava explained. It's you who are changing. Ethan approached, fascinated. The water looked unlike anything he'd seen, almost luminous, with an ethereal quality that defied explanation. What do I do now? He asked, voice reduced to a whisper. Kneel by the creek, Ava instructed, and ask. Ask what? From whom? That's for you to decide. Ethan hesitated. All his adult life, he had refused to ask for help. Solving problems alone was part of his DNA, part of his identity as a leader. Asking meant weakness, and weakness meant failure. But here, far from his glass and steel empire, away from the eyes of subordinates and competitors, what was left to protect? The image of Lily sprang to his mind. Pale, frail, her small body fighting an unrelenting disease. What was his pride compared to her life? Slowly, Ethan knelt at the water's edge. His reflection in the stream startled him, a man who looked older and more vulnerable than he remembered. Was this the real Ethan Blackwell, stripped of all symbols of power and status? Now close your eyes, Ava said softly, kneeling beside him, and ask from the bottom of your heart. Ethan closed his eyes. He felt foolish for a moment, a businessman kneeling by a stream in the middle of a forest, guided by a child. But thoughts of Lily chased away his hesitation. He began, his voice faltering. I don't know how to do this. Just speak, Ava encouraged, the way you would speak to your father if he were still here. The mention of his father caused something inside Ethan to break, a dam of emotions held back for years, decades. His father, a simple and honest man who always said some things were more important than money, whom Ethan had never truly listened to. Please, Ethan finally whispered, the words escaping as though they had a life of their own. Help my daughter. I don't know who I'm asking. I've never believed in anything I couldn't see or touch. But if there's someone, please, save Lily. His voice shook, and to his surprise, a tear slipped out, falling into the creek. More tears followed. Ethan Blackwell, who hadn't wept since his teenage years, sobbed openly, tears dripping into the crystal water. I'll do anything, he continued, not bothering to wipe away the tears. I'll give anything, not my money, myself, my time, my attention, everything I've never given before. As he spoke, something extraordinary happened. Where his tears touched the water, tiny points of light seemed to appear, like miniature stars reflected on the surface. The water around those spots began to glow with a soft, bluish luminescence that spread like ink on paper. Ethan opened his eyes, astonished. The entire creek now glowed with that otherworldly light, turning the clearing into an island of pale blue radiance in the middle of the dark forest. What's happening? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. They're your tears, Ava answered, her face illuminated by the water's glow. Grandma Elena said the price would be paid in tears, remember? Genuine tears. With trembling hands, Ethan took out the small vial Elena had given him from his now rumpled shirt pocket. He removed the cap and gently dipped it into the shining water. The liquid filling the vial appeared to hold its own light, as though Ethan had captured a piece of the moonlight itself. "Is this going to save Lily?" he asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "The water holds what you put into it," Ava replied. "Your tears, your love, your willingness to finally ask for help, to admit not everything can be controlled or bought." Ethan looked at the small vial in his hands. It looked so simple, so fragile. How could it contain the hope of saving his daughter? "The journey doesn't end here," Ava continued, as though reading his thoughts. "What you learned today, what you felt, that's also part of the cure." Gradually, the water's glow began to fade, returning to a clear, moonlit shimmer. Ethan carefully capped the vial and tucked it near his chest. "Thank you," he said to Ava, the words sounding awkward on his lips. Gratitude was not something he expressed often, nor sincerely. The girl smiled. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself for having the courage to come here." "How will we get back to the city?" Ethan asked, suddenly realizing they were in the forest at night, without a flashlight or proper gear. "The same way we came," Ava answered simply, standing up. "One step at a time, but going back will be easier." "Why?" "Because you're lighter now." And strangely enough, as he rose from the creek bank, Ethan realized she was right. Something had changed. It felt as if a weight he had carried for so long he hadn't even noticed was finally lifted from his shoulders. He took one last look at the creek, which now appeared just like an ordinary stream under the silver glow of the moon. "Let's go," he said, feeling a renewed urgency. "Lily is waiting." The sun was starting to rise when Ethan and Ava reached the city limits. The walk back had indeed been quicker, just as the girl had predicted. They spoke little along the way, each lost in their own thoughts. Ethan checked the vial every few minutes, as though afraid the luminous liquid might evaporate or lose its mysterious properties. "You should go straight to the hospital," Ava said, when they reached the street where Ethan had left his car, still unharmed as she had promised. "Aren't you coming with me?" Ethan asked, surprised. Ava shook her head. "No, this moment is between you and Lily." Something in the child's expression made Ethan hesitate. "I'll come back to thank you and your grandmother once Lily is better." Ava smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "Just remember what you learned, Mr. Blackwell. Some things cannot be bought." He wanted to say more, to ask more, but the urgency to get to the hospital overrode everything else. With a final wave to Ava, he got into the car and drove off. The city was slowly waking up. Workers headed to their jobs, bakeries opened their doors, and the first buses began their routes. Ethan watched it all with new eyes, as though seeing the world for the first time. Every person, every building seemed full of stories and meaning he had never noticed before. He glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized himself. Stubble covered his face, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his hair was disheveled. His expensive clothes were dirty and wrinkled. He looked like a castaway, not the powerful CEO of Blackwell Enterprises. Strangely, he didn't care. On arriving at the hospital, he parked in the first spot he found, not caring whether it was reserved. Clutching the vial in his hand, he ran through the corridors to Lily's room, ignoring the surprised looks of the medical staff at his disheveled appearance. Catherine stood at the door of the room, speaking quietly with Dr. Peterson. Seeing Ethan, her eyes widened. "My God, Ethan! What happened to you? Where were you all night? I tried calling you 1,000 times." Only then did Ethan remember that his phone had been off since meeting Ava in the church. "How is Lily?" he asked, ignoring Catherine's questions. Dr. Peterson's face tightened. "No improvement, Mr. Blackwell. In fact, her fever spiked overnight. We're trying to control it, but—" He hesitated. "I think we should discuss comfort care options at this stage." Comfort care, the medical euphemism for giving up, for accepting the inevitable. 2 days ago, Ethan would have demanded more tests, threatened to sue the hospital, offered to pay top dollar to bring in specialists from abroad. Now he merely nodded. "Can I see her?" "Of course," the doctor replied, clearly surprised by his calm reaction. "She's asleep now." We gave her medication for the pain. Ethan entered the room quietly. Lily looked even smaller in the large hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. Her face was flushed with fever, and her breathing sounded shallow and too quick. The blue bunny, Pingo, lay by her side as always. Catherine followed him in. "Where were you?" she asked more gently this time. "I was worried." "It's hard to explain," Ethan replied, still looking at Lily. "I went looking for help in a different place." "What place?" "A place I didn't believe existed." Catherine studied her ex-husband worriedly. She had never seen him like this, disheveled, speaking in enigmas, wearing an expression she couldn't decipher. "Ethan, are you all right? Maybe you should rest a little. I can stay with Lily while you—" "I'm fine," he interrupted gently. "Better than I've been in a long time, actually." He approached the bed and sat in the chair beside it, the vial of creek water still in his hand, now partially hidden by the sleeve of his jacket. "Could you give us a moment alone?" he asked Catherine. "I promise I won't take long." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be in the cafeteria. You look like you need coffee too." When Catherine left, closing the door softly, Ethan was finally alone with Lily. He looked at his daughter, so tiny and frail, fighting an invisible enemy that all his wealth and power couldn't defeat. "Lily," he called softly, not wanting to wake her, only wanting some part of her to know he was there. "Daddy brought you something." Carefully, he uncapped the vial. The water still glowed faintly, though not as brilliantly as it had in the creek. Its scent was gentle, like a spring morning after a light rain. Ethan glanced at the heart monitor, at the closed door, at the windows. What he was about to do likely violated a dozen hospital protocols, but he had already come too far to turn back. Very gently, he lifted Lily's head and put the vial to her lips. "Drink, princess," he whispered. "Please." Even in her medication-induced sleep, Lily seemed to sense something. Her lips moved, taking a few drops of the glowing water. Ethan watched in wonder as she swallowed reflexively. Unsure how much was needed, he let her drink about half the vial before pulling it away. He lowered her head back onto the pillow and put the vial in his pocket. Now all that was left was to wait. The minutes dragged on. Ethan held Lily's tiny hand between his own, watching each breath, each movement of her eyelids behind closed lids. He didn't know what to expect. An instant miracle, a heavenly light, a gradual recovery. After about 15 minutes, he noticed something. Lily's breathing seemed steadier, less labored. He looked at the monitor displaying her body temperature and saw it had dropped by a few tenths. "Lily," he called softly, squeezing her hand. Her eyes opened slowly, focusing on him after a few seconds of confusion. "Daddy?" Her voice was raspy, but stronger than it had been in days. "You're dirty." Ethan couldn't help but smile. Even while sick, his daughter noticed details. "I've been hiking, princess. How do you feel?" Lily seemed to consider the question seriously, as though taking internal inventory. "Not as hot," she finally answered, "and I'm hungry." Hungry. Lily hadn't had an appetite for days. Ethan felt his heart pound with a hope so intense it nearly hurt. "What would you like to eat?" "Pancakes, with maple syrup and strawberries." At that moment, the door opened and Dr. Peterson came in, followed by a nurse. They had come to check the monitors, as they did regularly, but froze, surprised to see Lily awake and talking. "Good morning, Lily," the doctor said, recovering quickly. "You're awake, I see." "I'm hungry," Lily informed them, as if it were the most important news in the world. Dr. Peterson glanced at Ethan with a raised eyebrow, then focused on Lily. "Well, that's good. Let's check your temperature, okay?" The nurse was already looking at the monitor, her expression of confusion mounting. "Doctor, her temperature has dropped to 99 degrees. It was 103.6 degrees an hour ago." The doctor frowned and placed a hand on Lily's forehead. "Let's verify manually." After using a traditional thermometer to confirm, Dr. Peterson appeared genuinely perplexed. "The fever really has decreased, significantly. And I'm hungry," Lily repeated, in case anyone had forgotten. "I'll order something for you to eat," the nurse promised. still looking confused but pleased at the little patient's improvement. Dr. Peterson gestured to Ethan, indicating he wanted a word outside the room. "I'll be right back, Princess," Ethan promised, kissing Lily's forehead. In the hallway, the doctor made no effort to hide his bewilderment. "Mr. Blackwell, I don't want to raise false hopes, but Lily's sudden improvement isn't unusual. The high fever was one of the main signs the cancer was progressing aggressively." "Does that mean she's getting better?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady, though his heart was nearly bursting with hope. "It's too early to say. We'll have to do more tests, perhaps repeat some of the scans from this week for comparison." At that moment, Catherine returned with 2 cups of coffee. Noticing the serious conversation, she stepped closer, a worried expression on her face. "Is something wrong?" "Lily's fever has dropped substantially," Dr. Peterson informed her. "And she's awake matter with an appetite." Catherine's face lit up. "That's good, right? It means she's getting better. As I was telling Mr. Blackwell, it's too soon to make predictions. I want to run additional tests right away." "Do whatever's necessary," Ethan agreed. "In the meantime, Lily wants pancakes." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Lily underwent a battery of tests: blood samples, another imaging scan, consultations with specialists. Ethan and Catherine took turns staying with her and waiting in the hallway during procedures. Surprisingly, Lily remained in good spirits and brimming with renewed energy. She ate nearly all the pancakes they brought after medical approval, chatted happily with the nurses, and even asked for her coloring books stored in the bedside drawer. Ethan watched everything with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Part of him, the rational, logical side that had guided his entire life, searched for medical explanations for her sudden improvement. Maybe a medication had finally taken effect. Maybe Lily's body had found a way to fight the disease. But another part, the part that had wept beside a luminous creek the night before, knew that something extraordinary had happened, something beyond science or logic. Late in the afternoon, Dr. Peterson called Ethan and Catherine into a private conference room. His face was serious, but there was a look of near awe in his expression. "I have the preliminary results from Lily's tests," he said, opening a folder. "And?" Catherine asked, voice trembling with anticipation and fear. The doctor ran a hand through his graying hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "I don't know how to explain it, but the indicators of tumor activity have dropped drastically in the last 24 hours. "What exactly does that mean?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "It means that, for some reason I can't medically determine, Lily's body seems to be responding. The cancer hasn't disappeared, but there are signs of regression in areas where, until yesterday, we only saw progression." Catherine let out a muffled sob, covering her mouth with her hands. "Does this mean she'll be okay?" she asked through tears. "It's much too early to make any prognosis," Dr. Peterson warned. "We need close monitoring, repeat tests in the coming days, and perhaps consult other specialists." But he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "If the current trend continues, yes, there's a real possibility of remission." Remission. The word hovered in the room like a rare and precious bird no one dared touch for fear of scaring it away. "What could have caused this change?" Catherine asked, wiping her tears. The doctor shook his head. "Honestly, I don't know. Sometimes we see delayed responses to treatments, or the body finds its own defensive mechanisms that we don't fully understand. Medicine has its limitations. There are things we simply can't explain." Ethan thought of the vial in his pocket. Now, with only half of the glowing water left, he said nothing. 3 days later, new tests confirmed what the initial ones had suggested. Lily's cancer was in regression. Her fever had not returned, her appetite remained strong, and even her hair seemed shinier. Dr. Peterson spoke of an exceptional case and an unexpected response. Other doctors examined Lily, intrigued by her sudden recovery. They talked among themselves about articles they could write, research they could conduct. Catherine alternated between overwhelming gratitude and fear that the improvement might be temporary. She spent every possible minute with Lily, as if afraid that stepping away would break the miracle they had received. Ethan, on the other hand, felt a peace he had never experienced before. He no longer needed medical explanations or guarantees. He knew what had happened, even if he didn't fully understand how or why. On the afternoon of the fourth day, while Lily took a healthy nap and Catherine went home to shower and change clothes, Ethan decided it was time to keep his promise. He needed to find Ava and Eleanor, to thank them for what they had done and to offer what? Money felt inadequate, almost insulting after all he had learned. He drove back to the poor neighborhood where Ava had changed his life. In daylight, the streets looked different, less threatening, more human. People chatted on porches, children played ball in vacant lots. Vendors offered fruits and vegetables at small improvised stands. He found the narrow street where he had parked before. He recognized the corner and the surrounding houses, but when he reached the spot where Eleanor's house should have been, he stopped, confused. There was no house there, only a vacant lot, overgrown with weeds and litter, enclosed by the same low, crooked fence he remembered. The gate hung from the same single hinge. He got out of the car and walked closer, thinking he must have the wrong address. But no, he recognized the place perfectly. This was exactly where he had seen the faded wooden house with its garden of impossible flowers. "Looking for something, sir?" asked an elderly man passing by carrying a shopping bag. "There was a house here," Ethan replied, still staring at the vacant lot. "A wooden house with a garden out front." The old man gave him a curious look. "Hasn't been a house on this lot for at least 20 years. It burned down when I was still young." "That's impossible. I was here 4 days ago." The man shrugged. "Then you saw ghosts, friend." "The only person who ever lived there was an old healer. Elena, I think her name was. She died in the fire along with her granddaughter." Ethan felt a wave of cold wash over him. The granddaughter? What was her name? It was so long ago. I think it was Anna or Ava, something like that. The old man continued on his way, leaving Ethan frozen in front of the vacant lot. Slowly, he returned to his car and sat there, trying to make sense of what he'd just discovered. It was impossible. He had spoken to Ava, walked with her, heard her voice. He had been inside Elena's house, smelled the plants, seen the objects on the shelves. His phone rang, breaking through his thoughts. It was Catherine. "Ethan? Where are you? You need to come back to the hospital right now." His heart froze. "Lily, is she—" "She's fine," Catherine cut him off, her voice thick with emotion. "Dr. Peterson just gave us the results of her latest tests. Ethan, the cancer, it's in complete remission. They're calling it a medical miracle." Ethan remained silent, staring at the vacant lot where Eleanor and Ava's house had once stood. "It wasn't medicine, was it?" Catherine asked softly after a few seconds. "It was whatever you did that night, wasn't it?" Ethan thought of the creek, the tears, the glowing water. He thought of Ava, who apparently had died decades ago. He thought of everything he believed he knew about the world, and how those certainties had been upended in just a few days. "Yes," he finally answered. "It was something I can't explain." "You don't have to explain," Catherine said. "Just come back. Your daughter is asking for you." Ethan took one last look at the vacant lot, and for a brief moment, he could have sworn he saw a little girl standing among the weeds, smiling at him. When he blinked, she was gone. "Thank you," he whispered into the air. "For everything." He started the car and drove back to the hospital, where Lily was waiting, cured by tears, faith, and water from a creek that perhaps existed only for those who truly needed to find it. A week had passed since Lily's inexplicable recovery. The doctors remained baffled, using terms like spontaneous remission and extraordinary case in their reports. Lily, meanwhile, seemed to have regained all her childhood energy and joy, as though the illness had never existed. Catherine cried with relief every time she watched her daughter run around the hospital garden during breaks between exams. Ethan should have been celebrating. The miracle he'd begged for had happened, his daughter was safe. Yet something still weighed heavily on his mind, a persistent feeling that the story wasn't finished. He couldn't stop thinking about Ava and the house that had disappeared, the vacant lot, the old man's words about a fire decades ago. None of it made sense. He was absolutely certain Ava was real, contemporary. She had spoken about his company's recent deals, known details about Lily no one could know. It made no sense for her to be the ghost of a girl who died so long ago. "You seem distant," Catherine said when they met in the hospital corridor after Lily was taken for another follow-up test. "Is something worrying you?" Ethan hesitated. How could he explain the unexplainable? Catherine had accepted, with few questions, that something extraordinary had happened to save Lily's life, but talking about a house that vanished and tears that glowed might be too much. "I'm just trying to understand a few things," he replied vaguely. Catherine gave him a look he knew well, a mix of curiosity and concern. "About Lily's cure?" "In a way, yes." Ethan adjusted his watch, a nervous habit he seldom displayed. "I need to find someone." "The person who helped you?" He nodded. "Do you think whatever cured Lily might disappear if you don't find this person?" Catherine asked, a note of fear in her voice. "No," Ethan quickly reassured her. "Lily is cured. I'm sure of that. Guys, I feel I owe this person something." Catherine smiled faintly. Ethan Blackwell feeling indebted to someone. The world really has changed. There was no malice in her words, only a sincere observation of how much he had transformed in recent days. "Go," she said. "Find who you're looking for. Who? Lily and I will be here when you return." Ethan began his search systematically, the way he tackled any major project. First, he returned to the vacant lot where Elena's house had been. By day, he investigated the surrounding area, talking to longtime residents. Most confirmed the story of a fire many years ago, though no one seemed to know exactly when. One older lady selling produce from a small stall on the corner vaguely remembered a healer who lived with her granddaughter. But when asked about dates, she only shrugged and said, "Time flows differently when you're old." Frustrated by the lack of concrete information, Ethan widened his search. He visited the city library, where he combed through old newspaper archives. He found a short article about a fire in that area in 1987, nearly 4 decades earlier. The article mentioned only 2 fatalities, an elderly woman and a child, without specifying names. How could that be? Ethan was absolutely certain Ava was real from the present day. She had mentioned recent business deals, known details about Lily. It made no sense for her to be the spirit of a girl who died so long ago. While driving back to the poor neighborhood where everything had begun, a new idea occurred to him. What if there were 2 Avas? What if the girl who guided him to the creek was somehow a descendant of the Ava who died in the fire? Or was it just a coincidence of names? He decided to change tactics. Instead of looking for the vanished house, he began describing Ava to the locals. An 8-year-old girl, dark hair in braids, penetrating eyes, far more mature than her age. On the 3rd day of this new search, he finally got a lead. A newspaper delivery boy said he knew a weird girl named Ava, who lived with her mother on the edge of the neighborhood, near an abandoned junkyard. "She doesn't have many friends," the boy explained. "Other kids say she talks to people who aren't there." Ethan's heart raced. "Can you show me where she lives?" The boy hesitated, clearly expecting some reward. Ethan took a $20 bill from his wallet and handed it over. The child's eyes widened. "That way," he said, pointing to a dirt road that led away from the last houses in the neighborhood. "After the bend, where the trees start, there's a smaller path on the right. They live at the end of it, in a house made of stuff her mum found in the trash." Ethan thanked him and followed the direction on foot. His Aston Martin would draw too much attention in that area, so he left it parked near a small market at the entrance to the neighborhood. The road soon turned into little more than a trail through tall bushes. As he continued, buildings became sparser and more run down. Finally, after about 15 minutes, he saw what could only be described as a shack. The house appeared to be constructed from scraps of wood, metal sheets, tarps, and other discarded materials. It was smaller than many rooms in his mansion, obviously insufficient shelter from the elements. A tiny improvised garden grew in recycled cans by the door, with a few plants Ethan recognized from the flowers he'd seen at Elena's house. He approached cautiously, not wanting to frighten whoever lived there. When he was just a few yards from the entrance, which was covered by a torn curtain, he heard a familiar voice. "Mr. Blackwell." Ava was standing between 2 cans that served as flower pots, wearing the same simple dress she'd worn when he met her in the church. Her dark eyes watched him with the same disconcerting intensity as before. "Ava," he said, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. "You're real." The girl tilted her head slightly to one side, as she did when considering something interesting. "You thought I wasn't. I went looking for you and your grandmother, the place where I saw the house. There was nothing there, just an empty lot." Ava didn't seem surprised. "Grandma Eleanor doesn't live there anymore," she replied simply. "People told me she died in a fire, many years ago." "People say many things," Ava shrugged. "Grandma always said truth and time appear differently to different people." Before Ethan could press her on this baffling point, the curtain at the entrance was pulled aside and a woman emerged. She was young, perhaps not yet 30, but her face bore the strain of too many hardships. Her dark hair, identical to Ava's, was tied back in a simple bun, and she wore clothes that were clean but very worn. "Ava, who's—" She stopped abruptly upon seeing Ethan, and her face went pale. Ethan was also startled. Something about this woman was familiar, as though he had seen her before, but he couldn't recall where. "Mom, this is Mr. Blackwell," Ava introduced calmly, "the man I told you about." The woman looked at her daughter with an expression difficult to interpret, somewhere between fear and resignation. "What's he doing here?" she asked softly, as if Ethan couldn't hear. "He came to thank us, I think," Ava said, looking to Ethan for confirmation. "Yes," he said quickly, "your daughter. She helped me in a way I could never properly repay." The woman studied Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "My name is Sophia Ramirez," she said at last, "and I believe we have much to discuss, Mr. Blackwell. Please, come in." Inside, the shack was even more precarious than its exterior suggested. The single space served as a kitchen, living area, and bedroom, with only a makeshift curtain separating what Ethan assumed was their sleeping area. The few pieces of furniture were clearly salvaged items: a wobbly table, 2 mismatched chairs, a thin mattress on the floor. Yet everything was scrupulously clean and organized. "Sorry I can't offer you coffee," Sophia said, indicating one of the chairs for Ethan. "We ran out yesterday, and I haven't been able to buy more." "Don't worry," he replied, feeling discomfort not just from the unstable chair, but from the extreme poverty he was witnessing. Ava settled onto a small wooden crate near the lone window, which was covered by a piece of transparent plastic instead of glass. "Is Lily all right?" the girl asked. "Yes, fully recovered. The doctors can't explain it. They call it a miracle." Sophia looked at her daughter with a mix of pride and concern. "Ava told me about your sick daughter, and how she took you to the creek." "So you know about the creek?" Ethan asked, surprised. "I know there's a special place in the mountains Ava sometimes visits. A place where she claims the water, helps people." There was skepticism in Sophia's voice, but also a reluctant acceptance, as if she had learned not to question certain things about her daughter. "It's not just the water, Mom," Ava stated calmly. "It's the tears. People have to be ready to cry." Sophia sighed. "My daughter has always been different. Since she was little, she's known things she shouldn't. At first, I thought it was just a child's imagination, but then, Ethan prompted when she trailed off. Then people started getting better. Sick people doctors had given up on, problems that seemed unsolvable. Always after Ava talked to them or took them for a walk in the mountains." Ethan looked at the girl sitting quietly by the window, slender and fragile. "You've helped others besides me." Ava nodded. "When I can, when they're ready. And you never asked for anything in return?" Ethan asked, glancing around at the obvious poverty in which they lived. "What would I ask for?" Ava answered, disarmingly honest. "People already give what they need to give when they cry at the creek." Sophia stood and walked to a small trunk in the corner. She took something out and brought it to Ethan, a yellowed photograph. "This was my father, Ava's grandfather." Ethan looked at the old photo. It showed an elderly man with white hair tied in a simple bun, sitting in a rocking chair on a porch. Beside him stood a young girl, unmistakably a younger Ava. "Your grandmother," Ethan murmured, looking at Ava. "Eleanor." "Yes," Sophia confirmed. "My father adopted the name Elena later in life. He was transgender, though he never used that word. He was born Elias Ramirez, but he always knew he was a woman. Ethan looked again at the photo, noticing details he had missed. The delicate hands, the shawl over the shoulders, the gentle features on the aged face. "When I met Elena, I thought she was a woman," he said, trying to process this new information. "For all intents and purposes, she was," Sophia replied. "She spent her final years as she wanted. It was hard in this conservative neighborhood, but people eventually accepted it, especially after she started helping them with natural remedies and advice." "So your grandmother was a healer," Ethan said to Ava, who nodded. "She taught me about plants and about the creek." "People told me about a fire," Ethan continued, turning back to Sophia. "They said Elena and a girl died many years ago." Sophia exhaled a deep breath. "There was a fire, yes, at the old house where my father lived, but he wasn't there at the time. He was in the hospital after a heart attack. The girl who died was a neighbor who often helped him with the plants." "Then why do people believe they both died?" "Because my father never returned to the neighborhood after that. The trauma was too great. Back then, there wasn't social media or easy ways to check the facts. People assumed the worst." Ethan felt relief at this logical explanation, but something still bothered him. "What about the house I saw, where Elena welcomed me?" Sophia looked puzzled. "My father lived in a small rented room on the other side of the city in his final years. He passed away 3 years ago, peacefully in his sleep." Ava, who had been quiet, spoke up. "Sometimes people see what they need to see. Mom." Ethan looked at the girl, feeling that familiar chill. There was something in her eyes, a wisdom that transcended her age. "You took me to a house that doesn't exist," he said, not accusingly, but as a statement of fact. "I took you to the place you needed to go," Ava replied simply, "so you could find what you needed to find." Sophia watched their exchange with a resigned expression, as if used to her daughter's riddles. Ava has always had this gift, knowing what people need, even when they don't know themselves. She hesitated, then added, "And seeing beyond what's in front of our eyes." Ethan tried to process it all. The house he'd seen, so vivid and real. Was it some kind of hallucination? A physical manifestation of Elena's wisdom, passed down through Ava? Or simply the girl's way of guiding him through his journey? "Why did you help me, Ava?" he finally asked. "Out of all the people in the world, why did you choose to help me?" The girl exchanged a glance with her mother, who looked suddenly uncomfortable. "Because we needed to meet," Ava replied. "It was time." "Time for what?" Sophia answered, her voice now tense. "To close a circle, Mr. Blackwell." Something about the way she said his name sparked a distant memory. Ethan studied the woman's face more closely, trying to remember where he might have seen her. "Have we met?" he asked. "We were never formally introduced," Sophia answered. "But yes, our paths crossed 7 years ago." "Where?" "At Blackwell Enterprises." Sophia drew a deep breath. "My husband, Daniel Ramirez, worked in your R&D department. He was laid off during the cuts you ordered in 2018. The information struck Ethan like a fist. 2018, the year he had carried out a massive restructuring at his company, cutting hundreds of jobs to boost profitability before a public stock offering. It had been one of the defining moments of his career, lauded by financial press as an example of decisive leadership. "Daniel Ramirez," he repeated, trying to recall among the hundreds of names that had crossed his desk at the time. "He developed the water filtration system your company patented," Sophia continued, her voice controlled but laced with sorrow. "He worked on it for 3 years. It was almost complete when he was fired." Memory flooded back. A talented engineer, passionate about his work, had lodged appeals against his dismissal, arguing that the project was nearly finished. Ethan vaguely remembered signing a memo denying the appeal, one among dozens of similar cases at that time. "I remember him now," Ethan said slowly. "The restructuring committee recommended discontinuing long-term projects to focus on immediate results. It was more than a project to Daniel," Sophia said, pain evident in her voice. "It was his life's purpose. He believed he could provide clean water at low cost to struggling communities." Ethan felt growing discomfort. "What happened to him?" Sophia averted her gaze, focusing on some distant point beyond the shack's wall. After the layoff, he couldn't find another job in his field. Companies didn't want someone who'd been discarded by Blackwell. He started taking temp jobs, each worse than the last. She paused, visibly struggling with her emotions. Depression crept in. First, he just got quiet. Then he stopped trying. One day he went out to look for work and never returned. They found his body 3 days later, under a bridge. The words struck Ethan like physical blows. Suicide. Daniel Ramirez had taken his own life after losing the job that Ethan had casually signed away with a pen stroke, likely without reading the details. I didn't know, he murmured, throat suddenly dry. Why would you? Sophia replied. No obvious anger, just fact. To you, he was just a number on a spreadsheet, a cost to be cut. Ethan glanced at Ava, who gazed back with those penetrating eyes. You knew this all along, he said, not a question. The girl nodded. Is that why you helped me? For revenge? No, Ava responded instantly. For healing, yours and ours. Ethan felt the weight of everything collapsing on him. Years of building an empire, making hard decisions, always justified by the bottom line. Never once had he truly considered the human impact. People like Daniel Ramirez had been abstractions, numbers on a report. But now, sitting in an improvised shack face to face with the widow and daughter of a man who had died indirectly because of him, none of it seemed justifiable. I destroyed your family, he said, voice barely a whisper. You didn't pull the trigger, Sophia responded. Daniel made his choice. But yes, your actions had consequences you probably never considered. Ethan looked around again at the extreme poverty in which they lived, a young mother and her child, abandoned to their fate in a merciless world, and it had all started with a signature on his luxurious desk, overlooking the city skyline. Without thinking, Ethan slid from the chair onto his knees on the hard floor in front of Sophia. I'm so sorry, he said, the words hopelessly inadequate. There's no excuse for what I did. No justification. Sophia seemed startled by the gesture. Mr. Blackwell, you don't have to— I do, he cut her off. I need you to know that I understand now. I see what I caused. And although I can't change the past, I beg your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Tears began to run down Sophia's face, not of anger or bitterness, but of long-held pain finally recognized. For years, I hated you, she admitted. Your name, your company, everything you stood for. I blamed you for everything we lost. But hate is too heavy a burden to carry for so long. She inhaled, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. Time can't be reversed, Mr. Blackwell. Daniel won't come back. Our years of hardship won't be erased. But forgiveness is the only way forward. For you and for us. Ava, who had observed silently, approached and took her mother's hand. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said with the simple profundity that seemed to be her hallmark. It's what Grandma always said. Ethan remained kneeling, feeling tears stream down his own face. He didn't try to hide or wipe them away. For the second time in his life, he allowed himself to be completely vulnerable, completely human. Thank you, he finally said, looking from Sophia to Ava, for showing me what truly matters, for saving my daughter, for giving me this chance I don't deserve. The creek doesn't just save those who drink the water, Ava said softly. It also saves those who shed tears. Ethan understood then the true nature of the miracle he had witnessed. It wasn't only about healing Lily. It was about his own healing, about learning to see beyond money and power, about recognizing the impact of his actions on the world. Sophia placed her hand gently on Ethan's shoulder. Get up, Mr. Blackwell. There's still a lot to be done. He rose to his feet, feeling simultaneously exhausted and renewed, as though completing a circle that began in that church days ago. I want to help you, he said, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it's the right thing to do. Sophia and Ava exchanged a glance, and the girls smiled, a genuine, childlike smile filled with hope. We knew you'd say that, Ava replied. That's why the creek chose you. Ethan stood outside room 507 of Memorial Hospital, his heart pounding in a way he wasn't used to, no longer the urgent drumbeat of a businessman in constant motion, but the anxious rhythm of someone about to bridge two important parts of his life. Next to him, Sophia nervously adjusted the simple but clean blouse she had chosen for the occasion. Ava, however, seemed perfectly calm, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked on the way. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Sophia asked quietly. "Does your ex-wife, does she know who we are?" "I told Catherine everything," Ethan answered. "Well, almost everything. I told her Ava helped me find an alternative treatment for Lily, and that I owed your family a debt I needed to repay." 3 days had passed since the revelation in the shack, 3 days during which Ethan had barely slept, reorganizing priorities, making plans, initiating changes he would never have considered weeks before. His assistant had nearly fainted when he announced he'd be cutting his workload in half to focus on family matters. The legal department was still processing documents to create a foundation to help families affected by corporate layoffs. And his personal accountant had voiced concerns when Ethan ordered the purchase of a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood to give to Sophia and Ava. "Are you ready?" he asked Ava, who nodded. "She'll recognize me," the girl said with quiet certainty. "Only she possessed." Ethan knocked softly and opened the door. The room looked different now. Gone was the dark atmosphere of a place where a child lay wasting away. In its place was a cheerful space, decorated with bright drawings and balloons. Lily was sitting on the bed, wearing normal clothes instead of a hospital gown, sketching on a pad of paper. Catherine was packing some of her toys into a suitcase. "Perfect timing," Ethan commented. "Are you getting ready to go home?" "Daddy," Lily smiled, putting aside her sketch. Then her eyes fell on Ava, and something extraordinary happened. Her expression changed to a blend of recognition and deep joy. "You came." Catherine looked puzzled, glancing from the unknown girl and her mother back to Ethan, clearly surprised by Lily's reaction. "This is Sophia and Ava Ramirez," Ethan introduced them. "Ava, Sophia. This is my daughter Lily, and my ex-wife Catherine." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Catherine said politely, though her gaze revealed unasked questions. Ava stepped closer to Lily's bed, extending the small bouquet of wildflowers. "I brought these for you," she said simply. "They're special, like the ones that grow near the creek." Ethan and Sophia exchanged tense looks. Neither had mentioned the creek to Lily. "Thank you," Lily said, accepting the flowers reverently. "They're beautiful." Then, to everyone's surprise, she reached out and held Ava's hand tightly. "I knew you were real." "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Catherine asked, moving closer to the bed. "Ava was in my dreams when I was sick," Lily explained, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She showed me a place with glowing water and said Daddy was out looking for help, that I had to be strong until he got back." The silence that followed was charged with emotion. Ethan looked at Ava, who only smiled serenely, as if there was nothing surprising about any of this. "You dreamed about Ava?" Catherine finally asked, looking between Lily and the stranger. "Lots of times," Lily answered. "She told me stories about a magical creek in the mountains and said Daddy would find the way if his heart was strong enough." Sophia brought her hand to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Ethan felt tears burn his eyes again. Until that moment, a small part of him had clung to the idea that perhaps Ava was just an extraordinarily perceptive girl who had exploited his desperation with a story of cure and redemption. But now, confronted with the impossible, that Lily and Ava had some sort of bond transcending normal understanding, he felt the last barrier of his skepticism crumble. "You can hold Pingo if you want," Lily offered, extending her blue bunny to Ava. "He knows you too." Ava accepted the stuffed rabbit with a smile. "Thank you for lending him to me. Did he take good care of you?" "Yes, he stays with me every night," Lily nodded earnestly. "Even when the doctor said I was sleeping, I could hear you both talking." Catherine sat on the edge of the bed, visibly shaken. "Lily, sweetheart, you never mentioned these dreams before." "I thought you'd worry," Lily replied with surprisingly adult logic. "And Ava said it would be our secret until I got better." Ethan watched with the sense he was witnessing something far greater and deeper than he could grasp. The two girls continued holding hands, now discussing hospital stays and treatments like old friends reuniting after a long separation. "I don't understand," Catherine whispered, moving closer to Ethan. "How could Lily know this girl? How could she dream about a creek she's never seen?" "Some things can't be explained logically," Ethan said, feeling the strangeness of being the one uttering such words. "I learned that the hard way." Sophia, who had been quietly observing, brushed away a tear at the corner of her eye. "Ava's always had that connection with people, especially sick children, but never this clearly." The adults watched the two girls, who were now drawing together on Lily's sketch pad, their heads close, lost in their own little world. Occasionally, they giggled at private jokes, as if sharing a secret language. "Why don't you both sit down?" Catherine suggested, indicating the chairs in the room. "I think we have a lot to talk about." Over the next hour, Ethan offered a simplified account of events, how he met Ava in the church, how she guided him to a place in the mountains where he found something that could help Lily, and how he later discovered the link between his family and Sophia's. He left out details about the vanished house and magical tears in the creek, but made clear the crucial part, that his past mistake had caused suffering to Ava's family, and he was determined to make it right. "So that's why you've changed so much in these past weeks," Catherine remarked when he finished. "For the first time in years, you seem at peace." "I'm learning to see things differently," Ethan replied, glancing at Ava and Lily, who were now standing by the window, looking at the sky. "To understand what truly matters." Sophia, who had remained silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "When Ava told me she needed to help the sad man in the church, I never imagined it would be you, Mr. Blackwell. Part of me wanted to stop her, another part," she hesitated. "Another part knew it was the right thing to do. Daniel would have wanted it." "Your husband sounds like an extraordinary man," Catherine said gently. "He was," Sophia replied with a sad smile. "He dreamed of making a difference in the world by creating affordable water filtration for poor communities. He said clean water was a right, not a privilege." Ethan felt the weight of that revelation. A project he had cut short might have benefited countless lives and saved Daniel Ramirez's. "His projects don't have to die with him," Ethan said suddenly. "If you have access to his notes, I can make sure they're developed, through a foundation or even Blackwell Enterprises." Sophia's face brightened. "I still have them all. Daniel documented every idea, every experiment. I kept all the boxes, even when we had to keep moving to smaller and smaller places." At that moment, Lily's voice interrupted as she called out, "Mommy, can Ava come visit us when we leave the hospital? I want to show her my room." Catherine hesitated only a second before smiling. "Of course, sweetheart. Ava and her mom are welcome at our house anytime." The two girls beamed, sharing another silent secret. Ethan watched them, feeling something in his chest he struggled to identify, a lightness, as though a tremendous burden had lifted. For the first time in years, perhaps the first time in his adult life, he felt truly at peace. Then he realized the truth that had been in front of him all along. Ava's faith and kindness had saved not only Lily, but himself as well. A dinner was served promptly at 7 o'clock in the spacious dining room of Sophia and Ava's new house. The table had been carefully set and accommodated 8 people: Ethan, Catherine, and Lily, Sophia and Ava, Dr. Martinez, who had treated Lily during her illness, and Mr. and Mrs. Collins, an elderly couple living next door who had quickly adopted the mother and daughter as part of their extended family. 4 months had passed since that meeting in the hospital. 4 months of profound change for everyone involved. Ethan had drastically cut back his workload, delegating responsibilities he once considered non-transferable. He spent Wednesday afternoons with Lily, a sacred commitment no business meeting could interrupt. He visited Sophia and Ava regularly, overseeing the progress of the Ramirez Foundation, created to develop Daniel's ideas and support families in similar situations. Sophia had taken over managing the foundation, discovering within herself a leadership ability she had never had the chance to explore. Her knowledge of Daniel's work, combined with an innate talent for connecting with vulnerable families, made her the perfect administrator for the project. Ava and Lily had become inseparable, despite the age difference. They attended different schools, but spent almost every weekend together, sometimes at one house and sometimes at the other. Initially cautious, Catherine had grown into a genuine friendship with Sophia, united by their concerns for their daughters and, surprisingly, by a worldview they realized they shared. "Does anyone need more?" Sophia asked, placing the last serving dish on the table. "Ava, can you bring the water pitcher, honey?" The meal was simple but lovingly prepared, a homemade dinner reflecting the spirit of the new family they had formed. Amid laughter and conversation, Ethan observed the group, marveling at how drastically their lives had been transformed. "Ethan," Catherine called, breaking into his thoughts. "You seemed far away. What were you thinking?" "About how unpredictable life is," he answered honestly. "How we're all connected in ways we don't always understand." "I'll drink to that," Dr. Martinez suggested, lifting her glass. "Here's to unexpected connections that heal." Everyone raised their glasses, even the children with their juice. Ethan noted how healthy Lily looked now, color back in her cheeks, fuller hair, eyes brimming with life. Her last checkup 2 weeks prior confirmed it. There was no trace of the disease that nearly took her life. "How are the preparations going for the filtration system launch in Riverdale?" asked Mr. Collins, a retired engineer who now volunteered with the foundation. "Scheduled for next month," Sophia replied, pride shining in her eyes. "The city council finally approved the installation in 3 of the poorest neighborhoods. It'll be the first fully realized project based on Daniel's original designs." "He would be so proud," Mrs. Collins said, giving Sophia's hand a gentle squeeze. "I think he knows," Ava said softly. "Grandma Elena always said that people we love never truly leave." A comfortable silence followed her words. Ethan noticed how even Dr. Martinez, a devoted scientist, accepted Ava's unusual wisdom without objection. There was something about the girl that transcended normal logic, something that invited people to look beyond their own limitations. After dinner, while the adults chatted in the living room, Lily and Ava went into the small backyard. Ethan watched them through the window, both sitting on a swing he had installed, talking under the starlit sky. "They share a special bond," Sophia commented, coming to watch with him. "A bond I can't explain," Ethan admitted. "Do you need to explain it?" Sophia smiled. "Some things just are. All my life I sought logical explanations, practical solutions," Ethan sighed. "I almost lost my daughter before understanding there's more out there than what I can see or control." "A difficult lesson for a man used to controlling everything," Catherine said, joining them. "The hardest," Ethan agreed. The 3 of them stood in comfortable silence, watching the girls under the stars. In the yard, Ava pointed to something in the sky for Lily, arms outstretched, tracing invisible patterns among the constellations. "There's one question I never asked," Ethan said softly to Sophia. "How did Ava know about me, about my company, about Lily?" Sophia hesitated before replying. "She's always known things she shouldn't, ever since she was very little. But about you..." She paused, choosing her words. "Daniel had a picture of you, cut from a business magazine. It was in his journal, along with clippings about Blackwell Enterprises. He'd look at it sometimes, especially on bad days. As a reminder of the man who ruined his career," Ethan muttered, guilt tightening in his chest. "At first, yes," Sophia admitted, "but over time, he started seeing it differently. He said, 'You represented the system that needed changing, not a personal enemy.' In his final months, he talked about writing to you, trying to explain why his project was important. He never sent that letter." "He never got the chance," Sophia replied. "But Ava saw that photo. She asked about you. Maybe that's how it began." "It still doesn't explain how she found me in that church," Ethan pointed out. "Some things will never have an explanation," Catherine interjected gently. "Maybe that's how it's meant to be." Later that evening, when most of the guests were preparing to leave, Ethan found himself alone in the backyard with Ava. Lily had gone inside to help serve dessert, leaving the 2 of them sitting on the swing beneath the stars. "Ava," Ethan began, "I never thanked you properly for what you did for Lily, for me." The girl swung her feet back and forth, watching the gentle motion. "You didn't need to thank me," she replied simply. "Even so, I want you to know you changed my life. You showed me truths I wasn't ready to see." Ava smiled, and in it, Ethan again saw that ancient wisdom hidden in a child's innocence. "You were right all along," he continued, "about what truly matters, about letting go of control and trusting in something greater." "It wasn't me," Ava replied, gazing at the stars. "It was faith." "Faith," Ethan repeated, feeling the word's gravity, something I always dismissed, but that ended up saving what I love most. Tears began streaming down his face, no longer the desperate tears he had shed by the creek, but tears of gratitude and pure joy. He made no effort to hide them or wipe them away. He let them flow, a silent tribute to the journey that had brought him here. Ava watched the tears with a serene expression. "Grandma Eleanor said tears of joy are the most powerful of all," she remarked. "They're the path home." Ethan nodded, momentarily speechless. "Do you remember what Grandma said about the price?" Ava asked. "That it would be paid in tears," Ethan answered, finding his voice. "Yes, but she never said they'd only be tears of pain." Ava smiled. "The tears of joy complete the circle." From inside the house came the sounds of laughter and conversation. Lily called for them, announcing that dessert was ready. "We should go in," Ava said, rising from the swing. Ethan followed, feeling more whole and at peace than ever before. In the past few months, he had rediscovered his humanity, reconnected with what truly mattered, and rebuilt bridges he once assumed were irreparably burned. As they walked toward the warm, light-filled home, Ethan reflected on all he'd learned. He had paid the price in tears, first in pain and despair, then in remorse and guilt, and now, finally, in joy and gratitude. And along the way, he had gained something his financial empire, with all its power and influence, could never give him: genuine happiness. The girl beside him, with her ancient wisdom masked by childlike innocence, had been the catalyst. But the journey was his. Every painful step, every difficult revelation, every tear shed. "Thank you, Ava," he said again, knowing the words were insufficient, but needing to say them anyway. Ava looked at him, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "The creek's water doesn't just heal the body," she said softly. "It heals the soul. Yours has been waiting for this for a long time." They entered together, where family and friends awaited with smiles and open arms, the final destination of a journey that had begun in despair, but ended in promise. For Ethan Blackwell, who had trusted only in the power of money for so long, this was the true wealth: to belong, to love, to believe. Small everyday miracles, more valuable than all the gold in the world.